Installing Cubase, of course, first you need to buy a copy, and that can be done by buying a download or actually buying a physical copy from a shop and so on. And then you need to look at actually installing it on your computer. Now, the first thing you need to do, obviously, is run the setup program. And as part of that process, you'll need to also license the software itself. And for that, you'll need one of these, which is a dongle. It's an e-licenser dongle. And for that, you'll also need to ensure that you have a code that you can actually enter into the e-licenser software, which we can look at now. So if we bring up the e-licenser window, you can see here this shows all the existing licenses associated with the dongle that I showed you earlier. Now you can actually register new products by actually accessing through the menus. You can see enter activation code. You put in your code for Cubase and it'll actually end up as one of the licenses within here after accessing the database online. Obviously, to use Cubase or any other audio workstation, you'll need an audio interface. And here we're going to be using this, which is the UR22, the Steinberg UR22, which is a simple 2-in, 2-out audio interface with MIDI. It uses USB 2 to connect to the computer. So you can use something far more elaborate. In that case, you'll have something like this, which is a much more advanced audio interface, which actually has a whole series of multiple ins and outs. With all its mic pre's, you might use for doing simultaneous drum mic recording, if you're recording a drum kit or recording a band all at once. So this unit also connects via USB 2. You also get much more elaborate digital audio clocking options, and also the options to increase the number of ins and outs via ADAT connectivity as well. So in front of me I've got this rather nice controller, and this means that I don't need to use the MIDI ins and out of my audio interface. It allows me to play notes into Cubase, and I also have a whole series of knobs and sliders that create continuous controller information which can be used within Cubase as well. MIDI controllers in fact come in all different shapes and sizes, so this is a rather large 88 note keyboard. We also have this here, which is just a controller for controlling EQ and levels and various other functions within Cubase. You might have much smaller ones with drum pads and so on. The important thing to remember also is that these actually don't make any sound themselves. These just send information, MIDI notes and controller values and so on. So it's numbers going to Cubase that can control functions within Cubase. So you've got your audio interface, you've got your controller. You obviously need to be able to hear the sounds that you're actually making when you're using Cubase, and for that you need your monitors. Now these are powered monitors, so the amplifiers are actually built into them. The most important thing when you set up your monitors is making sure they're on a stable base. You actually create a triangle, speakers there, head here, and you have them pointing at your ears. Make sure they're not too close to the walls, either the side or the back if at all possible. Angle them inwards, so you have the right one pointing at your right ear, the left one pointing at your left ear. And also make sure they're exactly the right height and also the right way up. So the other thing is optimizations, or making sure that your computer is set up right for music. Now this really does vary a lot between which operating system you're using, which platform, whether it's Mac, Windows and so on. But generally speaking, you want to make sure that you haven't got a load of weird and wonderful software running in the background that's going to get in the way of audio capture. That's the most important thing. The other issue is also whether you've got certain power saving modes engaged. You want to make sure your computer is running as fast as possible, especially when you're working on bigger projects. So making sure that those are avoided will make sure that everything runs as smoothly as possible. The other factor also is when you set up your audio card is actually setting the buffer size and ensuring that the latency, in other words, a slight delay that you might get when you're actually playing elements back and actually monitoring your own audio, isn't too long. So if we take the Cubase window and dive into the devices settings here and look at the device setup, we bring up this window and we delve down to the VST audio system settings. This is where we set the drive we're going to be using for Cubase. And there are many more advanced functions here. If we go into the specifics for the sound card we're using, you can see the ins and outs, 2 ins, 2 outs, and it tells you the latency, input latency and output latency. I click on the control panel here, and this brings up the driver settings window. It mentions the device and also the buffer size, and we can change that here. This is 64 samples. If we go to 256 samples, notice how the input and output latency change. In effect, the buffer gives you a safety zone. So if you want to run your computer and actually get more plugins to use simultaneously, then you want to up the buffer size, which increases the latency, so the responsiveness of how quickly the MIDI and audio go into and out of the computer. 64 samples brings the input latency and output latency right down. However, you might find that you can't run as many plugins. So you will get something that's far more responsive, but you won't be able to run as many instances of an instrument or reverbs and so on.